Science and religion have often had opposing views when coming to evidence on biblical issues. But these days, technology is playing a key role in new discoveries on the evidence of the existence of Jesus Christ over 2,000 years ago. And today we are delighted to have David Balsinger with his DVD documentary, The Case for Christ's Resurrection. So stay tuned, because this is an episode you will not want to miss, whether you're a believer or an unbeliever.
From coast to coast across North America, this is Deeper Living, bringing the inspirational marketplace to your front door. We exist to bring you the latest and greatest from authors, artists, and artisans around the world. You're going to love this.
Hello and welcome to Deeper Living. I'm Mary D. Book, your host, and today I'm thrilled to have David Balsinger, the creator of the documentary entitled The Case for Christ's Resurrection. And this is just, it will blow your mind when you see the evidence and the technology that David is going to present today that really will empower and your faith. It really gives you the strength to understand that there is truly physical evidence and not just this esoteric belief that Jesus Christ was actually a human being and did exist and walk on this earth. So David, thank you and welcome to the show today. It's a pleasure to have you. And you know, this is a really, this is amazing, because there's so many, skeptics in the world that historically everyone knows that Jesus existed. But in terms of being who he was in such a central role that he plays for us Christians and as believers, it's very easy for the world to sort of not give him, obviously, that credit and that due. And talk a little bit about sort of how you got involved with this this whole project, and really if this is something that just happened, or how did you come about getting involved with this?
Well, there's really three reasons why we made the current show. One was that there was another show that came out around Easter called The Lost Tomb of Jesus. And this show is done by skeptics that intentionally every Easter they make a show that attacks Christianity.
Right, right.
And so we wanted to counteract that show. And the second thing is, when it comes to the Shroud of Turin, which was the burial cloth around Christ,
right,
that has an image of the body on it, there were some new findings. One new finding was that the carbon-14 test that they did in 1988, where there was a re-examine of that by scientists, and they had determined that the early date of the medieval ages was actually due to the fact that they tested a rewoven patch from the shroud, the edge. So that was one piece of new evidence we thought needed to be exposed.
What a slim chance, too, because you know, of all the places to have taken a sample.
Well, it was logical that they would take it from the edge, because they didn't want to destroy any of the image. And so, they had, in 1978, I should mention this, there were 50 scientists that got to study the shroud for a week and do all kinds of, 32,000 photographs, for example. 1,000 tests resulted after that and during, in 92 different disciplines of science. In addition to that, there have been 49 findings that we bring out in the DVD and the book that directly correlate what's on that shroud to the biblical accounts of the crucifixion and resurrection.
Right. So all of this, now, was this sort of an interest that you had? I mean, obviously, as a believer, I think most of us find this extremely fascinating for those who, in a way, like the mystery. But what's so important about this is the aspect that there was the resurrection. There's no doubt that Jesus Christ was a historical figure, but this is the resurrection, which as Christians is obviously key to our whole, the whole redemption, the whole life in Christ, and really our whole core belief that Jesus ascended into heaven and the hope that one day he'll be back. Now, what initiated what kind of started this whole project rolling?
Well, let me go back to when I was in high school, and I used to attend Sunday school classes. And, most churches are Sunday school, and those kind of classes are taught by volunteers. And even before I was in high school, I always had questions the teachers couldn't answer. And most of it came in the evidence area. Well, how do we know this? How can we prove this? And as a company, Grizzly Adams Productions, we've made something like over 400 shows in the last 7 years, and 100 of those are faith-based, where we actually examine biblical accounts and prove them up for people that need to see the evidence.
Right.
And this is really one more of those kind of shows, but why this one is so important is because you hit the nail on the head. Christianity is really centrally based on the resurrection of Christ. And we have one show airing that says, well, we found the lost tomb of Christ, so he could not possibly have resurrected.
Here it is. Yeah, he didn't go anywhere.
But they failed to mention, well, we didn't find any bones or any body in that tomb. And so this document, the shroud itself, and a few other things that have been found, as I say, there's 45 pieces of connective evidence that really do connect this burial cloth to the biblical account. And for even the believer as well as the non-believer, this is hard to argue with. Every piece of evidence is extremely hard to argue with when we're talking about the latest scientific findings.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And I do want to point out that, you know, your company, Grizzly Adams Productions, you have really produced and bring on products that not only, you know, you have the family entertainment, but you also have done various products that really substantiate Christianity. I mean, is there sort of, what do you look for when you bring on a project, when you're sitting kind of more in the role of producer?
Well, when we're talking about our products that we either produce family-friendly type entertainment, and always have, such as the Grizzly Adams TV series. But when we look at a faith-based product, we're generally looking at a controversial project that, particularly that skeptics and non-believers would benefit from viewing.
And this definitely jumps into that mold. And because I wanted to make that distinction, because that's really sort of what your company is synonymous for, sort of tackling a little bit of the tougher issues and, you know, kind of diving right in there. And this DVD, the documentary, now, was this shot on location all over, you know, the Middle East, or how did this, with this, you know, interviews with the scientists, so how does this bring us up to date into sort of how all the production took place for this?
Well, we shoot the scientists all over the U.S., but we also went to Turin, Italy, and interviewed a number of people there.
And that's where the shroud
is actually encased behind protective glass. And you know, I might point out, over the past 2,000 years, there's been 10 attempts to destroy the shroud directly or indirectly. It's been on fire twice. There was a fire in the cathedral where it's been kept in the last 10 years, and it was rescued by a fireman with practically supernatural strength because it's behind 4 inches of protective glass. He rushed in there with the cathedral and the building on fire with an axe, broke through glass they said you could not break through, and he carried that shroud out and collapsed on the front steps of the building.
Wow, wow. Well, and I think when we get to the evidence as well, you know, there is a supernatural element to the shroud that, like you said earlier, is undeniable. Scientists are having a hard time grappling with some of the evidence that they've been handed in this documentary. And what I want to ask you, what have you found, you know, in doing that research, and you've put it all together and you've went to Turin, what have you found people, what's the response from people as you were documenting all of this and continuing with your research? Did you come across people who were willing to talk about it and different opinions on whether or not Christ really did resurrect?
Well, of all the faith-based shows we've done, this is one of them that we might call a showstopper. People really want to know, if they're Christians, they want to see the evidence so they can talk to other people about it. If they're non-Christians, it just kind of stops them in their tracks, and they really want to see this. And they kind of approach it from different angles. One, could it be true? And then they like to challenge it from a scientific point of view. And that's where they really get hit hard, because we're talking quantum physics. We're even talking a new type of quantum physics that they believe is apparent in the shroud that has recently been discovered in the past 2 years. So some of it is so over the head of the average person. But you take some deep scientific person, or, you know, a scientist himself that's a non-believer, he can understand some of this science that a lot of us don't understand, and it's very compelling, and we might get into some of that.
Right, absolutely, and I'm glad that you said that, because reading through a lot of the evidence, I myself was going, okay, layman terms, let's pull it down. But what I think is so amazing, and it really shows sort of the awesome complexity of God, is that he really does speak to us through science. I know there's many Christians that would like to separate, so much religion and science, but really God is in every single, every element of this earth, anything that's been created. And so you really can't negate the power of science. God is in science. And I find it ironic now that, it's science that's proving to scientists that in fact God does exist. And, it's so amazing to me how this is really, like you said, speaking to scientists in a language that they can understand. And yet you brought it down with all the evidence and brought it down into a format and into the book as well that accompanies the DVD, so that the everyday average, person can really understand and still, I think, grasp how incredible these findings really are. And we're actually going to cut to a clip, part of the promo clip that you guys use when you're out there really promoting the DVD. So let's take a look at a bit of that promo clip.
Hi, I'm Steve Deal. I'm here with Ryland Angel. Hey, Ryland, how are you?
Very well, thanks, mate.
Great. Ryland has a new CD out on the EMI label, and it is going to take the country by storm. You need to check it out. Check it out at www.DeeperLiving.com.
And that's just a small snippet of the promo tape of what you guys are really putting out there and some of the evidence. And I do want to jump into this a little bit, because there was a lot of doubt. We were talking about that carbon-14 data that came out. Was that the study in 1988?
Yes, in 1988 there was a carbon-14 study done on the Shroud, and it came up as it was a Middle Age artifact.
Right, and now this is what we were talking about earlier when you said the sample that was taken off that edge of the Shroud, that's the piece that we're discussing now that was tested.
That's correct, and how that turned all around, I should say, first of all, there had already been thousands of tests done in 92 scientific disciplines, over 250 hours of scientific research on this, a number of findings that took it back to the time of Christ.
Right.
But one single test, the whole world and news media said this is a fake and fraud, ignoring all the other tests.
Right, absolutely, just ready to jump on it and just say no. And that's so, I hate to say typical, but that's so true. And like you said, ignoring the fact that so much of this was conclusive, that the scientists that had produced these tests, had conducted these tests, were experts in various fields of science. It wasn't just, a little group of scientists that came together, but all these tests that were run. And so now, what's been the latest technology that has sort of gone back and put this back there on the forefront? What is it that now has said, okay, that test was a fraud, the 1988 carbon-14, that was the wrong piece of material, but what's the new test? What's this new technology that has made this discovery just unbelievable?
Well, that's the one thing about the Shroud and science, how it really works together. Every time there's a new scientific innovation, oftentimes it can be applied to the Shroud and new stuff is discovered. But you'll like this little story about how they exposed the carbon-14. There was a couple that gave a scientific paper at a Shroud conference, and these people were not real scientists.
Okay.
They were looking at this and they said, what we think is that maybe they tested a patch on the Shroud instead. And there were some scientists that got really irritated about that had been involved in the Shroud. One of them was a guy named Ray Rogers, who was a scientist and a chemist at Los Alamos National Labs in New Mexico. And he said, I can prove them wrong. So he goes and, because he had samples of the piece that was tested as well as from other parts of the Shroud.
Right.
So he goes and examines that, and he tells on our show, he says, I could determine in 1 hour they were exactly right. They had tested a rewoven patch. So then they did 5 other kinds of peer-reviewed tests and determined that that was true. And so that issue's been put to bed forever. They tested a rewoven patch from the Middle Ages on there, so that's done away with.
Right.
The new evidence centers around holographic images of the shroud.
Right, right.
And what this kind of involves, to give you something in perspective that viewers might understand, a lot of times imagery taken of planets and other things out in space have to be run through these holographic things to really see what's there.
Right, to capture the depth. When we're looking at, obviously out there in the universe, and like you said, more the planetary environment, it has to have more of that 3D image.
And you get better clarity, things you cannot see under normal photographic images. So we're not shooting anything out in space, and what we had were photographs of the shroud. And we cannot use current photographs of the shroud because, believe it or not, they're not as good as black and whites taken nearly 100 years ago.
Wow.
So the photograph used by the scientists was a photograph from 1931 called the N-ray photograph.
Okay, okay.
And to everybody, it looks like an ordinary photograph, but it's unique in itself. If we take an old camera before digital cameras, we take a picture and we have a negative. You print the negative and you have a nice print.
Right, right.
Well, this is the opposite. The shroud itself is the negative, so when you take the picture, you have the print. So that's contrary.
Right, right. So it's just the opposite. You've got the dark image that comes out with the lighter.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you not only have that phenomenon, but then when you take this picture, which they say cannot have any three-dimensional imagery in it, and it's the only known photograph in the world that does. Yes. And you take it to this lab in Amsterdam, and they said for months, you cannot get any three-dimensional image out of this picture.
Right.
Well, they were proven wrong. They worked with it. It has all kinds of three-dimensional image. Matter of fact, it has more data in that photo, 4 times the data of an ordinary photograph, and we're not sure what that data is. Because some technology, we got to have more technology to determine what it all is.
To clearly define that. Now, and you've been traveling, I know, at some of the industry shows that I've been to as part of the media. You actually have a display that is the holographic image, that is what we're talking about, taken from the picture, that people can view with the 3D glasses.
Yes.
Is that, or without the 3D?
Well, there's some images you need the 3D glasses.
Okay.
Others you don't because of the way they put it together.
Right.
Now, the ones you do not need the glasses for, and the clearest images of all, are glass images.
Okay.
And so what we have with the shroud, let's kind of explain how that worked. Let's assume this is the body.
Okay.
It was an 18-foot cloth that they started at his feet, took it over his head, and wrapped it this way.
Okay.
And so at the point of resurrection, he was not laying on the bottom of the cloth. Quantum physicists have determined that.
Okay.
He was somehow elevated.
Okay.
The cloth was elevated above the body, underneath as well as on top. So the image went straight up, and went straight down. That's why there's no wrinkles on the image or flat areas on the image. And so when you look at these holographic images, it's like you're there at the crucifixion.
Wow.
Everything is in such detail.
And they were saying that there had to be some sort of course they're saying energy or, radiation that is what actually caused the image to become imprinted on the fabric to begin with. That's how, the whole image came about. And when we get to a little bit more of the finite evidence, which I find just fascinating, we can talk about that. But I know with the 3D glasses, this is a set that you've put together. And this is just amazing. The 3D glasses come in this. So when you're watching this DVD, you do need to use this to view it. This is The Case for Christ's Resurrection. This is also the book that came out that you contributed to afterwards to really sort of put together the conclusive evidence just sort of in the written form. So you can share that, as well as the DVD. And it's sold as a bundle. And you'll see this on our website at www.deeperliving.com. And it's just an incredible, it is absolutely fascinating. And to read the evidence, I really walked away with a real poignant, I don't know, we can get into that, but just really, it was so intense, some of this that they pulled out, and the horrific I guess, brutalness of, you know, what Christ went through and the beatings that he took. All of that actually comes out in the evidence on the shroud. And, you know, I found that to be very, it was really, you know, it really hit home. It was a very powerful thing to read empirical evidence that isn't denied, that, you know, it isn't a Hollywood depiction, it isn't somebody's idea of how it must have happened, but it was really, truly, it can now be even scientifically proven that, you know, it was an incredible ordeal and trauma to the body that Jesus really sustained before he died on that cross. So we'll take a short break and we'll be right back with David Balsinger.
Award-winning designer Deborah Bordeaux brings you her For You Designs collection, made in sterling silver with crystal and semi-precious gems. Each item comes uniquely gift-packed with an exclusive poem inspired by the Word of God. This collection is themed by life events: friendship, love, praise, remembrance, and even salvation. The perfect reminder of God's promises for yourself or for a cherished friend or family member. With the For You Designs collection, you will never be at a loss for words.
And welcome back to Deeper Living. We are visiting with David Balsinger and of Grizzly Adams Productions. And before the break, we were really sort of discussing all of this data that has come out. There were, was it 45?
49 items.
49 items. Let's talk about those, because that's what I found so fascinating, that all of this data really did, literally, it is powerful evidence that they've been able to pull out of the shroud. So I want you to share with our viewers some of that.
Well, I think a couple of the most conclusive things to me out of those 49 is that in those days when someone died, they put coins on their eyelids to keep their eyelids shut. And this has been even a custom in this country. Mm-hmm. They did it when Abraham Lincoln died, for example.
Right, right.
And they have been able to determine what the coins are that were on top of the eyes. They were Pontius Pilate coins, only produced for 5 years. One was 29 AD and the other one was 31 AD. However, one of those coins had a misspelling on the coin. And no one knew before, no coin dealer knew that there was a batch of these coins in which they were imperfect. Mm-hmm. And since that time, they have now found 3 or 4 more of these coins, only due to the fact that they were discovered on the Shroud of Turin.
Unbelievable.
So that's one thing. It dates that back to that exact time.
And that image literally was impressed onto the shroud. I mean, this is what they've been able to just pull off.
They've been able to determine what the coins were and the dates. And the other thing were some flowers on the shroud. Mm-hmm. Dr. Wanger discovered these flowers, and he discovered 28 flowers, and have later been verified by botanists in Israel. Right. Some of those flowers only grow within 30 miles of Jerusalem, and one flower opens at various stages during the day, mm-hmm. and it was determined that that flower was picked between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. Now, here's even something more surprising. That's the one
that I just found so amazing, because the flower actually stays in whatever position it was picked in, and that's how they obviously determined the time. But that there even exists a flower that can do that just is amazing to me.
They call that clock flower, mm-hmm. the clock flower.
Appropriately.
Yes. And when you look at the shroud in holographic image, the flowers do not come up in holographic image, nor some of the other things on the shroud, only the body. So we didn't see flowers that resurrected. Right. We didn't see any of the torture implements that were resurrected. Right. Only Jesus resurrected.
Wow. Wow. And what were some of the, I know that they definitely concluded that the body that was in there had indeed been crucified, and they were able to even find all of that evidence as there. The other thing that I found interesting was that the blood on the shroud, the body was on top of the blood, like there was no impressions left under the blood, and just all of that work. Is that, all of that, is that sort of, again, more of a case for the resurrection? I mean, all of those things, they were talking about the blood work and how people could never have painted this, or there's no way to forge this image. There's no way it can be a forgery.
That's been a common skeptic argument,
mm-hmm.
that this is a painting.
Mm-hmm.
There is no way that this could have been a painting. The image itself is on the very tip of each fiber.
Right, right.
You know, there have been a few pigment colors found on the shroud, but for probably 200 years, painters used the shroud to actually paint icons of Christ.
Right.
And some of those icons are so close that if you took it into a court of evidence, you could prove beyond the shadow of doubt that they were the same source.
Wow.
So, you know, it's conclusive in that way. But some of the other new findings, there's been a plaque discovered under Jesus's beard that's never been known before.
I found this is fascinating.
And we don't know what's on it for sure. There's 3 or 4 Hebrew letters, and some scientists believe it spells Abba, meaning father, but there's a lot more peer research that has to go on to determine what that really means.
Figure that. How has this project differed from so many of the other documentaries and projects that you have brought on that might have had a controversial nature? How has this differed for you personally? What has this project meant to you?
Well, to me, doing all these faith-based projects are pretty important because evidence seems to pile on top of evidence. But when it comes to this, the fundamental belief of the Christianity, it's, you know, there's nothing you can say that can refute this.
Right.
So if you had any doubts about anything, when you start seeing this evidence, it's all there. Matter of fact, the evidence is so complicated in some areas that we produced a second DVD called The Fabric of Time for the scientific people that want to get it in the most possible depth that they can get it. But
and I'll hold this one up, and it has just a little bit of a different cover on this one as well.
And this is the one that you would find in places like Walmart and those kind of places that airs on secular TV.
Right.
But to give you an idea of the quantum physics, they now believe they've discovered a new quantum physics branch by studying the shroud that goes back to creation itself. Because of during the resurrection, how they call it an event horizon, this body was raised a bit and the shroud was extended over it but not touching. So there's some kind of new quantum physics there that they know is there, but they don't quite understand it. And there's physicists in Europe now and the U.S. studying that to see what kind of other things they can discover as a result of that.
From that. That's amazing. There's your next documentary. When they get that, all that discovered, that's the addendum to this. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on our show. Incredible just facts and findings, and again, how religion and science, how our Christianity and science really have blended together to really substantiate probably the core, really the cataclysmic event that really gives everyone in this world hope and redemption. And thank you for joining us today here on Deeper Living. It has been a pleasure to have you as a viewer and continue to watch us on this show every day.